Developed in 1981 by Tosei and published by SNK, we have Vanguard. And this is the Atari 2600 version, which was released in 1982. Let's pop it in the old Atari 2600 wood grain 6-switch model and see how it looks today. Now, Vanguard was first released in the arcade in 81, and this is the 82 Atari 2600 port. And I wasn't familiar with either version when they were first released. I never played the arcade version, and I never really played the Atari 2600 version either. So, when I popped this game in, my first thought was, holy fuck, there's a good scrolling shooter for the Atari. I didn't even realize that scrolling shooters were ever released for the Atari. This game was ahead of its time in many ways, and not just the arcade version, but the actual Atari 2600 port of this game was way ahead of its time. It took me a little bit to get accustomed to Vanguard, but once I got into it and sat down and played it for a couple of hours, I really got to enjoy it. It was a really fun, pleasurable experience. I found this game extremely fascinating because it's one of the earliest, if not the very first, scrolling shooter. And you can see how games like Gradius and R-Type really took inspiration with this type of game. Or this particular game, I shouldn't say type of game, but this game in particular. Now there are two features I'd like to concentrate on right now in this game that really kicked off the whole scrolling shooter genre. And the first is that there are swarms and swarms of enemies. It's basically a constant barrage of enemies flying at you and shooting. Now the second thing I'd like to point out is that the environments in this game are harmful to you. If you touch the walls of the playing area, it's instant death. And that basically set the standard for scrolling shooters. Now the one thing you'll see in modern scrolling shooters that is just not present here, and that's just because it wasn't simply thought of yet, is the power-up system, where you can power up your weapons and earn stronger weapons that do cooler things and blow up more stuff. And that simply isn't an option here. But what is rather unique, and it's kind of neat to see the evolution of these games from the earlier stages to the more modern ones, but in this game you can shoot in 4 directions. And then in the arcade cabinet model, this was accomplished by a 4-directional fire button. There was 4 buttons, 4 different fire buttons. Holy fuck, you see that? A continue option. I ran out of lives in this game, and the first time I did that, I saw the continue screen, and I said, holy shit, this game even has stage continuing. It's unreal. This game was way ahead of its time. So as I was saying, you can shoot in 4 different directions. Kind of a unique feature, and it's a feature you don't see a whole lot in scrolling shooters. It was just an interesting experiment in the whole style of game. And this was accomplished in the arcade by four different fire buttons. But in the Atari 2600 version, the Atari 2600 joystick controller only has 1 fire button. So to accomplish this, you have to hold the direction with the joystick you want to shoot and hit the fire button on the joystick. But this causes you to move your ship also. So every time you're firing in a direction, you're constantly moving a little bit in that one direction. So that's my only real complaint with this game, and it's not a major one. It was just simply it simply had to be in order to accomplish this 4-directional shooting. There's no conceivable way around it without incorporating it into your ship's movement also. But I think a default mode where if you're not pressing any direction, you automatically fire forward when you hit the button would have been nice. This isn't the case. You have to actually press forward on the joystick or towards the forward direction and hit the fire button in order to shoot in that direction. And you'll also notice that sometimes I'm firing in two different directions at once, and that's accomplished by holding the joystick in the diagonal direction you want to fire in two directions of. Now this type of gameplay is only seen on the expert mode. That's mode A on the Atari for difficulty. And that's the mode you're seeing now. You can play this on mode B, which is novice. And the difference in that is that you have an automatic turbo fire constantly going. So you don't have to press the fire button at all. You're just automatically firing constantly. And you just move the joystick around and you just start firing in that direction. I tried it out first in the novice mode and didn't like it too much. It felt a little too easy. So I switched it over to the expert mode. And this game still isn't that hard because of the unlimited continues. But it is difficult to finish without using a continue. So if you'd like to challenge yourself that way, then it is quite a challenge. Another feature I found pretty interesting in this game was that the scrolling perspective seems to change from stage to stage. You start out on a horizontally scrolling stage, and then the following stage is a vertically scrolling stage, and you switch back and forth. That was a pretty interesting concept, and I don't remember seeing that type of alternating scrolling pattern again until, I guess it was like 1985 or 6 with the Twin Bee series, or Stinger as it was known in North America. This is the final stage in the game before it repeats, and when the game does repeat, it repeats a lot faster, making the game a lot more challenging. And I particularly like the enemy designs on this stage. I thought they were very reminiscent of, was it Contra or Super C, that had those shrimp-type aliens that were attacking you. And those really, I think they got inspiration from this game. And Konami, for sure, was definitely inspired by this game. I mean, this game is more or less the predecessor to Gradius, which was one of Konami's best games of all time in the 8-bit era. I mean, this game basically is everything you're looking for in a scrolling shooter, and it has it for the Atari 2600. The only thing that's noticeably missing is a power-up system for your weapons. But here is the piece de resistance, the end boss. This game has a f***ing end boss. I don't know if it's historically the first game to have an end boss, but it's the earliest one that I can find. And the only thing I found disappointing was the end boss was extremely easy to beat. Just one shot, and it was more or less you couldn't miss. It sounds harder in the arcade version, but this version, it was, as soon as you come on the screen, you hit the fire button, and he's dead. But after you run through the game once, and you get to the second run-through, you can see it's a lot more challenging. You have very little time to pick up your energy pods, which are those squares with the E in the middle of them. And you need to pick up at least one of those throughout a stage in order to make it to the end without dying. Otherwise, you run out of fuel and you die. And that's your fuel bar at the bottom there, that red line. And I forgot to mention that when you do pick up one of those energy cubes, you become invincible for a few seconds, and you're able to ram other ships, and you're able to run into the background environment and not die. So that's a nice touch. You definitely want to try and pick those up when you see them. And speaking of picking up things when you see them, you got to pick up this game if you have an Atari 2600. It's simply historic. I'm Dommy from Classic Games Revisited. Until next time.